Many years ago I was on what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that is domiciled out of one city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while a driver domiciled out of that destination will drive halfway with a load that is destined for my city. We meet in a parking lot, switch trailers and drive back home. I had been on this run for a few months and found that I always got to the meet point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot at about 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon, it became apparent that the dog was right outside of my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and is trying to alert me to something, or else he is just a pain and I will need to throw something at him to scare him off. It is important to note that the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So, I sat up and looked out my window. Standing there, mere inches on the other side of the glass, was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow, and was barking at me. His eyes were crazy and he was frothing at the mouth a little. The scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking all the while. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from then on. A friend who is a truck driver told me this one. He was driving through the edge of some bushland on his way back to Perth, Western Australia, when he hit a kangaroo. He stopped the truck, grabbed his knife, in case he needed to dispatch it, his flashlight, and got out. He went over to the kangaroo. It needed to be dispatched, as it was alive and in immense pain, but he got this weird feeling that he was being watched. He flashed his light around and saw dozens of pairs of red eyes watching him. The whole mob of kangaroos was just standing there watching him kill one of their mates. Kangaroos have red eye shine. He quickly dispatched the kangaroo, bolted back to his truck, and took off. He said it was the creepiest thing he had ever seen on the road. Where do you want me to start? I'll stick with a story from when I was straight and sober. Coming back from Kununurra, very northern town in Western Australia, to Perth one night. Seen no one else on the road for hours, but every now and then, on a long straight, I could see a set of tail lights in the distance. All of a sudden, there's the tail lights, attached to a trailer that stopped dead in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes and swerved around it. And that's when I realized that the truck, towing 3 trailers, had run off the road into the only large tree for miles. If not for how this ended, I'd laughed my butt off at the irony. I pulled forwards, off the road, and jumped out. My co-driver, who'd been asleep, but got thrown out of the bunk when I slammed on the brakes, was already calling emergency services. As I got to the back of my 3rd trailer, wisps of smoke started from under the cab of the Volvo wrapped around the tree. I raced back, grabbed a fire extinguisher and was running towards the wreck when I heard a groan from the ditch, about 10 meters in front of the wreck. The driver had been thrown clean through the windscreen, and while he was an absolute mess, at least he was alive. The Volvo was, by now, in flames. But that just gave me some light to inspect old mate for injuries. And then I heard the sound that, even now, tears me to the core. A thin, high-pitched squeal, gradually progressing into the most soul-piercing scream I've ever heard. His co-driver had also been asleep in the bunk. And with the truck wrapped around the tree, he was stuck. And I hadn't thought to fight the fire. And now some poor bastard was burning to death, trapped in a steel coffin, while I just collapsed. Impotent and broken. I still drive trucks now. It's my life. It cost me several relationships and a marriage, but I don't know anything else that I can do. I love the life, I love the freedom, and I always know that I can lose everything in the blink of an eye. But I never again, and never will, drive as a 2-up team. I could never live with killing a workmate because I messed up. Not mine but my grandfather's. One night after completing his water delivery, he stops at a roundabout to let the other car go through, but it doesn't, and soon people hop out with knives and tools and they yell at him to cut the engine and to hop out of the truck. He guns it, smashing their car out of the way, and goes around the roundabout and drives to the nearest police station and tells them what happens. He thinks they were trying to steal the bulldog from his truck, because the only way to get it is to steal it or buy a Mack truck. Obligatory not a trucker, but I work as a customer service rep for a trucking company in Omaha. 2 stories that come to mind. Both are quite serious. The first one happened about a year or 2 before I started. One of our local Omaha drivers was grabbing a load from the Council Bluffs rail and headed towards downtown 13th Street. A woman had stepped out in front of his truck and she was killed instantly. Investigators had later found a suicide note she had written shortly before our driver hit her. The driver was a new guy and he quit immediately after the accident. This one happened shortly after I started working there. We dispatched local and OTR drivers and one evening, just before shutting down for the day, we start getting multiple calls from people in the California area headed west. Motorists are reporting that one of our drivers is speeding, cutting off people, not signaling, and just all around reckless driving. We managed to identify the driver in question, call him up, and the guy is inconsolable. Turns out his sister had been murdered at her apartment and he was literally racing to get back to Nebraska as fast as his truck could take him. My boss told him to park the truck immediately, and bought 2 plane tickets. One for the driver to fly back to Omaha, and another ticket to fly a volunteer out to California to pick up his truck. Short-haul driving on Northway, toward Quebec. No cell signal or sparse in that area. My cell rings. What the hell? No number, no caller on the other end. I turned off the phone. A minute later, I see this red splatter from the right lane, into the center and then like a long drag mark, it ended in the left lane. I slowed a bit and realized, it looked like a rolled up carpet. I kept driving. About 3 kilometers ahead, there was another truck pulled over, flashers on, and driver inspecting the front. I pulled over to check on him. Sure enough, he was the one that hit the carpet, a deer as he told me. He had a push bar on his Volvo and it was covered in deer entrails and blood. Had to radio in for assistance as he said his temp went up, and there it was, a leg and hoof were literally inside the radiator fins. New York State Police troopers showed up, and I guess called in a tow truck. The look on the trooper was priceless though. He saw the carpet back down the way, and had no idea what it was, but put in call for DOT to clean up. Spit up his coffee when we showed him the deer hoof and the radiator. Kinda surreal with the blue strobes. Weirdest of all was the driver that hit that deer, said his phone rang in that same spot mine did. Then he saw the deer and tried to change lanes, no luck. Good thing no one got hurt and no one else around, that made it creepier. Ex-tow operator, got a phone call from my wife who was picking me up at 1 a.m. She calls frantic screaming, there's been an insane accident but she only sees one car. Our shop was a block away. I get there to light it up with my emergency lights and block the scene for first responders. There's only one car, this is a 6-lane bridge that goes over the thruway. The car's engine is inside the firewall. There is no front of the car. I get out and I am talking with this guy who's in shock. I ask him, were you hurt? He says, no, I pulled over because I thought I had a flat tire. I walked around the front to look at the passenger's side and soon as my foot hit the curb I heard a loud bang. I turned around and my car is gone. My next words are, what did you hit? He said nothing at all. Now I'm more confused and hint at the front of his car is gone. He says, nope, that's not my car. So I start looking around, there isn't a car on the road and nothing within eyesight. I can clearly see in 1/4 mile and there is nothing anywhere. Some lady comes walking by and he says it's her car. She's hammered as hell. Police and fire get there and for about 15 minutes, while he is looking for the car with me. Another cop radios him and says he found the car. It went over 6 lanes and a median, down then up the thruway on ramp up a hill through a fence, off 4 parked cars into a pole half a mile away. This things was in park. The car's rear bumper was against the front seat. Estimated her speed at 100 miles per hour and no tire marks. If he would have taken just a 1/10 of a second delay stepping on that curb he would have been beyond dead. I was off the clock but helped the police secure the scene until accident investigation showed up. Neither person was hurt and both cars were totaled. I have seen many fatal accidents as a record driver. I have never seen anything like that folks walked away from. I recovered cars and extracted accidents that were nowhere near that bad. Note that the car was in park, which doesn't mean a lot, all you have to do is break the park paw and it will roll. But to go that far, over that much stuff and mostly uphill, and her with such extensive intrusion into the car, even bent the pillars, there had to be divine intervention. I've posted this before, but the most frightened I have been driving a truck was going over Donner Pass one night on I-80 towards Sacramento. I had stopped in Reno and checked weather reports. It was early May or late April, can't remember now, but there was still a chance of bad road conditions up there. The weather reports called for light snow flurries and the CA.site said chain laws were not in effect, so I went on my way. I got up to the top and suddenly the sky just dumped a blizzard. It was almost total whiteout conditions and I was past the chain-up areas and the rest areas with no real safe place to stop. I could just barely make out the tracks of the truck ahead of me and I slowly followed those, praying that he did not run off the road. The worst thing about it, the wind was blowing, making the snow swirl violently in my vision. That caused me to experience this weird vertigo I have only experienced like that one time. I began to feel like my body was losing which way was up. Fortunately it did not last very long. I got down to a lower elevation and it suddenly became heavy rain. I was never so happy to see a rainstorm on a mountain that I can remember. This is a story my dad told me. He was a long-haul trucker for about 15 years, and currently shorter runs in the tri-state area. He and his older brother were tag-team truck drivers back in the early 2000s when timings weren't as closely regulated. They drove 2 trucks, and would switch out when their time driving was up, to hit deadlines faster. One night, as they were driving through Arkansas I believe, my uncle was leading with my dad behind. My father recalls a giant puff of red, much like when you hit a deer in a semi. The pair thought nothing of it until they pulled over for the night. On my uncle's grill was a hand. Naturally they freaked the hell out and called authorities. The hand was confiscated and it was later discovered to belong to a suicidal man, who had jumped off an overpass and was disintegrated by my uncle's truck. They still made deadline, despite spending a day in jail. They were released when they found the suicide note in the man's house. I suppose I'd better stick a funnier story up, to counteract my horror one. One night, I was hauling sulfuric acid from the rail siding to the mine site. Normally do 3 loads a shift, so it was pretty full on. First load of the night, and I get overtaken by a Commodore full of aboriginals. Now, country Australians will recognize the type. No windows, because they're all smashed, only one headlight, no tail lights, and a stream of empty beer cans falling out. A few kilometers down the road, they're stopped off the side of the road trying to flag me down. "Hey brother, we got no petrol. Can you give us some?" "Well, actually, no. I run on diesel, you need petrol." "Nah brother, that's okay. We only going to Laverton." "Yeah, nah, ain't gonna happen. Sorry guys." Take off again, warning everyone about the carload of aboriginals right on the side of the highway. Heading back after the first load, and they start jumping onto the road, trying to make me stop. Not happening guys. Pull on the air horn and drive straight towards them. Sure enough, I'm still 200 meters away when they run off the road. I got back to rail, and rang the coppers in Leonora, and they promised to send a car out. Heading out on the second load, and the coppers overtake me before I get there, so no trouble when I went past. Coming back from the second load, coppers are just leaving, and the aboriginals have gotten a fire going and pushed the Commodore well off the road. Third load, and by now it's nearly 3 a.m., figured it'd be a nice, quiet run. Not likely. Now, for a bit of information, this is a fully loaded, triple-trailer road train, grossing 147 tons, and coming in at about 40 meters long. Say 325,000 pounds, and 130 feet for our American brethren. I'm doing 90 kilometers per hour approaching the broken-down Commodore, and the fire's burnt low, and it looks like they're all asleep. Then I notice a dark patch in the middle of my lane. I figure it's probably a E-head kangaroo, and so I move over to the opposite lane to avoid it. I kid you not. This dark pile jumps up out of my original lane, runs over, and lies down in the middle of the opposite lane, directly in my path. So I move back to my correct lane. And the pile jumps up, runs over, and lies down in his original spot. I start slowing down, spotlights shining, and grab a hold of the air horn cord again. I slowly start to swerve into the oncoming lane again, and a second dark pile jumps up off the side of the road, runs out and lies down in this lane. Now I've got 2 lumps to avoid. So, I just gave in to the inevitable. I took my foot off the brakes, slammed the throttle to the floor so hard I nearly punched it through the firewall and aimed for the gap between them. Never let go of the air horn, that was just screaming to the world that I was coming. Well, F me. There's not enough room between them for me to fit through. And I'm committed, there's no way I can stop in time. So, I just screwed up my eyes and kept rolling. Thank God these boys gave in. Right at the last second, they both bailed off the road and disappeared into the bush. But, I'm willing to bet they never tried this again. Not nighttime but close enough. My dad is a truck driver who regularly makes trips to a nearby major city. This city is known as one of the most dangerous cities in the country, so my dad takes special precautions. One of them being he always leaves several car lengths in front of him at a red light so he can get out if needed. One day around 5 a.m. he was sitting at a red light and someone hit him so hard that his truck moved forward several feet and it knocked the hat off of his head. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw someone run up to the back of his trailer and faint. He decided he should stay put and wait for the police to show up. Turns out a Cadillac had hit him from behind going 110 miles per hour. Both men in the front seat were completely decapitated. You could see the spot on the trailer where their heads hit. The driver was still drunk and high from the night before. My dad was put on leave for several weeks and endlessly questioned. For some reason the police thought it was suspicious that he had left space between him and the next car. He felt really guilty about it for a long time, but we told him had he not been there they would have hit the cars in front of him and more people likely would have died. I was a kid when this happened and he never let me ride along with him again. I have come upon some god-awful accidents at night. Cars completely under trailers with the tops basically sheared off. People laying in the road after being ejected from their car. The roads can be an awful place at night. The creepiest thing I have ever had happen though was one night I was making a night drop and kept getting the feeling like someone was watching me. The hair kept standing up on the back of my neck and I just felt uneasy. I decided something was off and left to circle back in the morning. Turns out I'm pretty sure someone was watching me because someone was shot and killed there a few nights later in an attempted robbery. That's one thing the person who trained me drilled into me and I tell it to everyone I meet. Always trust your gut. If something feels off it probably is. It's your subconscious's way of telling your brain to pay attention. My dad's a trucker, has been for about 50 plus years. The most horrifying thing that he saw was a really horrid accident on a northern Canadian road. A small car, think like a Volkswagen Beetle, was in an accident. I think a large truck hit her head on, or something like that. Anyways, the accident was so severe that pieces of this woman were everywhere, and the road was filled with blood and other bodily matter. This was fairly late in the night, around 1 to 2 a.m., and the depth of highways sent out one lone guy as a cleanup worker. My dad drove past the accident and saw this guy throwing up in the ditch, so he stopped and asked him if he was okay and what was going on. So the guy told him about the accident, and my dad saw everything. The guy was really struggling to clean everything up, and my dad, being the type that'll help out anyone and everyone, helped him clean everything up. This was a few years ago, and he still has nightmares about it. Not a truckie, but I do a bit nighttime driving here out on the road when hardly anyone is around. Anyway, I live in New South Wales, Australia. I need to take a leak, so I pull off the highway somewhere near Bargo around 1 or 3 a.m. While the stream is flowing, I felt like I was being watched. I nervously check for headlights on the horizon or the soft sound of tires on the road, but nothing is coming. I'm just about to finish and I hear a loud snap of a twig. I'm scanning in the general direction, but I can only make out a long shadow, and I thought I heard a low growling noise. I quickly reach for my torch and turn it on. I see nothing. Unfortunately, the batteries had almost died too. But whatever it was, I could hear the faint footsteps running off in the distance. Not a trucker, but 10 years ago as I bicycled through Belize, I stopped to sneak camp at a day-use area, which was a small parking lot, handful of picnic tables and a short trail to a blue hole, lots of them in the region. I enjoyed a nice swim after the everyday users were gone, and pitched my tent next to a picnic table. I wake up around 3 a.m. to the headlights of several trucks. Being in Belize and Belize being Belize, I didn't think twice and ran into some bushes, wearing only my underwear. A dozen of shadows came out of 2 trucks, rolling big empty barrels across the parking lot and into the woods. Came back with the barrels full, loaded up the trucks and took off, all without noticing me. Didn't sleep super well after that. That happened a long time ago to my grandfather's friend. That friend was an experienced trucker and was kinda training a younger one, taking him to where he went. So, it's midwinter and they are driving through a snow desert stretching for as far as I can see. It's middle of nowhere and there was not a soul for literally hundreds of kilometers around. I should have clarified that story is taking place in the Soviet Union somewhere near Omsk back in the 60s. This means there was practically no traffic whatsoever, because car ownership was very limited at the time. A trucker could drive for hundreds of miles without seeing a single car. While they were driving, an immense blizzard hit them, reducing the visibility to 1 meter max. They kept on driving until they went off the road and got stuck in the snow. Again, with no passing cars, their situation was desperate. There was little food, no heating, no other supplies, and the blizzard could potentially continue for days. After 6 hours off, what I imagine was a very uneasy waiting, the fear and panic took the better of the young and inexperienced fellow. He insisted they should walk along the road and try to find help. Keep in mind, there were no towns or cities for hundreds of miles around. The older fellow tells him to calm down and wait. If they went, most likely they would die from exhaustion and exposure, and their best bet would be to at least wait for the sky to clear. There was not much hope even then, but at least a better visibility would give them a slim chance to reach safety. The lad, however, was extremely nervous and they began to argue. It escalated and the younger one grabbed a wrench. My grandfather's friend had a knife in his hand, but decided not to risk it. His partner got out of the truck, barely even opening the door, and stumbled away, knee-deep in snow. My grandfather's mate waited there for another day, and in the morning he was rescued by the military, who were sent to look for them, guessing that they got stuck in the snow most likely. He and a group of soldiers left the truck there and continued along the road since the help came from the trucker's starting point, Point A. The other fellow went towards their destination, Point B. In a few kilometers my grandfather's friend saw a small black object, barely visible in the sea of white. His heart stopped because he was guessing what this was. He yelled at the soldiers to stop the car. Upon inspection, buried in the snow was his young partner. The black object was his cap, which could easily have been missed, so deep was he buried in the snow. The body was sat upright, frozen and rigid as stone. The trucker told my grandfather that the cold has perfectly captured the expression of profound despair and horror on the young and boyish face of the lad. That fellow blamed himself for the rest of his life for not stopping him, for failing to convince him to stay.